Well, Ollie contacted me. He said, would you mind going over to the house and checking on her? And I was like, yeah, sure. On the wall, these large splatters and swaths of blood. I was terrified, and I went and I called the police.
In 2021, a woman named Liz opened a cold case file that a professional DNA laboratory had already declared unsolvable. She was not a detective, she was not a forensic scientist. She was a volunteer with the Fairfax County Police Department who did genealogy as a hobby in her spare time. Parabon NanoLabs, one of the leading forensic genetics companies in the country, had assessed the case and told investigators the solvability rate was effectively zero. The DNA matches were too distant. The family trees were too diffuse. There was not enough time or money to untangle a suspect from 1,500 fourth and sixth cousins spread across multiple countries. Liz said she would give it a try. She worked for free. She worked in her spare time. She was ready to give up multiple times across 3.5 years. Then in August 2023, she sent Detective Melissa Wallace an email. I think I found someone of interest. 4 weeks later, the man she had identified was in a police interrogation room in upstate New York, confessing to a murder he had committed 29 years earlier, a murder that had left a 2-year-old girl alone in a house with her dead mother for 2 days, and a family carrying an open wound across 3 decades. His name was Stefan Smirk. And before we get to him, you need to understand what was lost on the night of November 18th, 1994. Because to understand why Liz spent 3.5 years on this case, you first have to know who Robin Lawrence was. Welcome to Black Docket. Today we are covering one of the most remarkable cold case breakthroughs in recent years. A volunteer genealogist, 1,500 distant cousins, and 3.5 years of doing one more thing. If you are new here, subscribe and hit the bell. We go deep every week. Now let's get into it. Springfield, Virginia, November 1994. West Springfield was the kind of neighborhood where families put down roots. Quiet cul-de-sacs, good schools, houses with yards being slowly improved by young couples building towards something. Reseca Lane was exactly that kind of street. Number 8600 was home to Ollie and Robin Lawrence, their 2-year-old daughter Nicole, and a future that everyone who knew them could already see taking shape. That future ended on a Friday night when Ollie was out of the country and Robin was home alone. Robin War Lawrence was born in Memphis, Tennessee, the daughter of Robert War Sr., a World War II veteran, and his wife Jessie. She grew up during the final years of Jim Crow, the daughter of parents who had not been allowed to ride in the front of a bus or visit the city zoo except on designated days. She channeled everything she witnessed into art. Robin earned a fine arts degree from Carnegie Mellon University, one of the most demanding arts programs in the country. What she produced immediately after graduation announced her talent in a way most artists spend entire careers working toward. She was selected to sculpt the first medal for the Martin Luther King Jr. Nonviolent Peace Prize, which was awarded to Rosa Parks. Her father, who had spent years fighting for a country that would not fully fight for him, watched his daughter's hands create that medal. For my parents, who grew up in Memphis during Jim Crow and could not ride in the front of the bus, her sister Mary later said, that was a big deal. Robin was warm, funny, and deeply present in the lives of people around her. Her friend Lori Lindbergh, who met her in ballet class, described her as beautiful, not just physically, but in the quality of attention she gave the world. Very personable, very fun-loving, just very down-to-earth, Lori said. Robin met Ollie Lawrence in the late 1980s. He was calm and kind, the kind of man who made people around him feel at ease. They married on New Year's Eve 1989. Their daughter Nicole arrived 3 years later. By 1994, Robin was working in advertising. Ollie was an executive at an airline. They were fixing up their home, improving the yard, working on the details of an ordinary life. Nicole had recently undergone a liver transplant and was dependent on immunosuppressive medication to survive, medication she needed every single day without interruption. Robin understood that schedule the way mothers understand things that cannot be allowed to slip. Nobody who knew Robin Lawrence could name a single enemy. Not one person who held a grudge. Not one relationship that carried any weight of danger. That reality made what happened on November 18th, 1994, all the more incomprehensible. Ollie flew to the Bahamas on Friday, November 18th for a business trip. Robin was home with Nicole. Investigators later established that the last known contact with Robin was around 6 p.m. that Friday evening. At some point that night, investigators believe around 9:30 p.m., someone cut the screen on the window off the back deck of the house on Reseca Lane. They climbed through, they put on a ski mask and leather gloves, they moved down the hall toward the master bedroom. What followed lasted long enough to leave 49 stab wounds on Robin Lawrence's body. Wounds on her hands where she fought back. Wounds in her back and legs. A severe gaping wound to the neck. The phone cord in the bedroom had been cut before she could use it. She had fought her way out of the bed and continued fighting across the room. After it was over, the killer went to the bathroom. He cleaned up. He left through the same window he had entered. He drove home. Nicole was 2 years old. She was alone. She had been alone since the moment it happened, wandering through rooms, finding her mother, understanding only what a 2-year-old can understand about blood and stillness and the fact that something was wrong. She placed tissues on her mother's wounds. She brought empty baby bottles. She was trying to help. She was in that house for 2 days. By Sunday, November 20th, Ollie had been unable to reach Robin all weekend. He called his friend Lori Lindbergh and asked her to check on the house. She drove over. There was no answer at the front door. She went around to the back deck and saw the cut window screen. She climbed through the same window the killer had used. Nicole came down the hall, eyes wide, no expression. Lori moved toward the master bedroom. She could see the walls from the corridor. She called 911. She rushed Nicole to the hospital. The little girl needed her medication immediately and had gone 2 days without it. Lead crime scene detective Mark Garman documented everything. The entry point, the trail through the house, the master bedroom, Robin's body, the phone cord, the blood on the walls that told the story of a woman who fought until she could not. There was no sign of robbery. Cash and jewelry were still in the bedroom. This was not random opportunism. The violence was concentrated, prolonged, and deeply personal in its intensity. Investigators suspected someone Robin knew. They turned to Ollie. He had been having an affair with a colleague, discovered as investigators dug into the marriage. The weekend his wife was murdered was the weekend he happened to be out of the country. Detectives flew to the Bahamas. They confirmed every element of his alibi. He had been on the correct flight, at the correct hotel, the entire time. With Ollie eliminated, they had very little. Then Garman noticed something in the bathroom. A washcloth on the towel rod near the sliding tub door. A small brownish stain, easy to overlook, easy to dismiss. He photographed it anyway. He had it tested. The stain was blood. It did not match Robin Lawrence or anyone connected to the household. Investigators believe the killer had cut himself during the attack and cleaned up before leaving. That DNA profile went into CODIS, the FBI's national database. No match. The investigation went cold. Years passed, then decades. Robin's family lived with the open wound of not knowing. Her mother, Jessie, died without ever learning who had killed her daughter. Her father, Robert Sr., a World War II veteran, 101 years old at the time of sentencing, carried that unanswered question across a century of living. Nicole grew up without a mother. Her cousin Lauren stayed close, but they rarely talked about Robin. "I didn't want to make her anxious," Lauren said. "It was better left unsaid." Mary Warcowens, Robin's sister, reached the point where she told herself she had to let it go. "When my mother died," she said, "that was kind of like, well, she went to her grave not knowing what happened to her child." Inside the Fairfax County Police Department, the file never fully closed. In April 2021, cold case detectives Melissa Wallace and John Long were assigned to review it. They pulled the crime scene photographs. They read the reports. They looked at everything the 1994 investigation had documented. "That's like your worst nightmare," Wallace said, looking at the bedroom photos. Long was struck by the violence of it. It looked brutal. The washcloth DNA was still there. Preserved, waiting. It just had nowhere to go. In 2019, before Wallace and Long formally reopened the case, Fairfax County Police had already turned to Parabon NanoLabs, a Virginia-based DNA technology company that had helped solve multiple cold cases across the D.C. area using forensic genetic genealogy. Ellen Graytack, Parabon's director of bioinformatics, ran the washcloth DNA through GE Deadmatch and Family Tree DNA, two consumer ancestry databases that return matches showing people who share genetic material with an unknown individual. The results came back, and they were deeply discouraging. The matches were extremely distant. Fourth cousins, sixth cousins, relationships so far removed that the shared ancestor with the unknown suspect could have lived 8 or 10 generations back. Each of those distant cousins had hundreds of descendants alive today, meaning the tree of possible suspects was not a needle in a haystack. It was a needle in a field of haystacks. Parabon assessed the solvability rate and told investigators the honest truth, effectively 0. They did not have the time or resources to untangle a suspect from a genealogical web that diffuse. The DNA also indicated the suspect likely had half Eastern European ancestry, around 25% Irish, and a combination of English, Italian, and Scandinavian making up the rest. Parabon used that information to produce a DNA phenotyping composite, a facial model built from genetic predictions: fair skin, wider jaw, narrower nose, dark blue eyes, light brown hair. They generated the composite as a young adult at approximately 25 years old. Detective Wallace showed it to Ollie Lawrence on a video call, hoping it would spark a memory. It sparked nothing. The case had a DNA profile, a phenotyping composite, a solvability assessment of 0, and no path forward. That is when Liz raised her hand. Liz was a volunteer with the Fairfax County Police Department. She was not a professional genealogist. She was not a forensic scientist. She did genealogy as a hobby, the kind of patient, methodical tracing of family history that most people find either fascinating or impossibly tedious, depending on their temperament. She had the right temperament. I just felt I wanted to give something back to the community, she told investigators, and I believed that I could actually be helpful in solving some of these cases. Investigators handed her everything Parabon had generated: the ethnicity breakdown, the list of distant cousin matches, the composite sketch. They told her what they had. They told her what Parabon had concluded. She said she would try anyway. What she was working with was approximately 1,500 distant cousins. No first cousins, no second cousins, mostly fourth to sixth. People who shared a common ancestor with the unknown suspect somewhere between 4 and 6 generations back. For each of those cousins, Liz needed to build a family tree stretching back to that ancestor and then trace every descendant forward to the present day. Multiply that across 1,500 cousins. I was not certain that I could crack it, she said. She started with the most promising matches, the cousins who shared the most DNA, even if it was still only a tiny fragment. She traced their family trees backward through generations, following the ethnicity markers Parabon had established. Some lines led to Eastern Europe, some to Ireland. Some went dead within a few generations because records simply did not exist. She hit walls constantly. I was ready to give up a number of times, she said, but I kept thinking, well, I'll just finish this. Just do this one more thing. One more thing became 2 more things. 2 became a week. A week became a month became a year, and then another year, and then another. 3.5 years after she started, Liz had something. She had identified 2 cousin matches who were not related to each other through any path she could trace, meaning their connection to the unknown suspect came through different branches entirely. If she could find the single couple where those 2 separate family trees intersected, where one branch married into the other, the unknown suspect would be a descendant of that couple. She followed both trees, she traced the branches, she searched records in Canada where some of the ancestors had settled generations ago. And then she found it. This woman on this tree married this man on this tree, she said. That was it. That was the aha moment. That was when I realized he is a descendant of this couple right here. The tree of possible suspects had collapsed from 1,500 cousins to the descendants of one couple. One of those descendants was a man named Stefan Smirk. Detective Wallace pulled everything available on Stefan Smirk. Computer programmer, Niskayuna, New York, a quiet suburb in upstate New York. Married with 2 kids in high school, nice house, and not so much as a speeding ticket on his record across his entire adult life. There's no way this is our guy, Wallace thought. Then Long found his yearbook photo from 1988, age 16. They held it next to the Parabon phenotyping composite. The jaw, the nose, the eye shape. It looked very similar, Long said. We're like, well, maybe this does make sense. They cross-referenced what they knew about Smirk's history. In November 1994, he would have been 22 years old. He had been an active-duty soldier stationed at Fort Myer in Arlington, Virginia, approximately 20 miles from the house on Reseca Lane. He had lived in Virginia at the time of the murder. He had no criminal record. He fit. On September 7, 2023, Detectives Wallace and Long drove 400 miles to Niskayuna, New York. When they arrived at Smirk's address, he was in his driveway taking out the trash. They identified themselves as cold case detectives from Fairfax County, Virginia. They said they were looking into a cold case from the 1990s. They asked if he would talk. He said yes. He invited them inside. The conversation that followed was 5 minutes long. They asked for a DNA swab. Smirk signed the consent form without asking a single question. No, why me? No, what is this about? No, should I call a lawyer? Stone-faced, Long said. No surprise, no fear, nothing. They packaged the swab, left their business card, and drove to their hotel. The DNA results would take weeks to process. They would not need to wait that long. Detective Wallace's phone rang. It was Smirk. He told her he was at the Niskayuna Police Department. He said he was there to turn himself in. The station was locked and he was having trouble getting anyone inside to respond. Turn yourself in for what? Wallace said. She ran to Long's hotel room. She was still on the phone. She banged on his door. He opened it. She told him they needed to go. Local officers had taken Smirk into custody by the time Wallace and Long arrived. He was ready to talk. They sat him down in an interrogation room. They had not yet received the DNA results. That confirmation was still weeks away. They needed him to provide details of the crime that only the killer would know, without being prompted. Smirk did not need much prompting. He told them he was 22 years old on the night of November 18, 1994. He had been drinking beer. He had been taking ephedrine pills, a stimulant that the FDA would later partially ban, in part because of dangerous psychiatric side effects when combined with alcohol and existing mental health conditions. He drove to West Springfield because he was familiar with the area. He had a friend who lived nearby. He entered through the back deck window wearing a ski mask and leather gloves. He said one of the reasons he had enlisted in the army was because he wanted to kill. Wallace knew the critical question. She asked if he had been injured during the attack. He said yes. That was why his blood was in Robin's bathroom. That was why a volunteer genealogist's 3.5 years of work was about to be confirmed by a DNA match. That was the biggest confirmation, Wallace said. That was when I knew we were in business. At one point, unprompted, Smirk looked at the detectives and said, I honestly believe that if it wasn't for my wife and my kids, I probably would be a serial killer. I am a serial killer who's only killed once. A week later, forensic testing confirmed Smirk's DNA matched the blood on the washcloth from Robin's bathroom. The probability that the DNA belonged to someone other than Smirk, 1 in more than 7 million. Liz's 3.5 years of one more thing had just closed a 29-year-old murder. Stefan Smirk was born in 1971. In November 1994, he was 22 years old and stationed at Fort Myer in Arlington, Virginia, assigned to the same military installation that sits directly across the Potomac from Washington, D.C. He was honorably discharged from the Army after his service. He became a computer programmer. He married a defense attorney named Dawn Budarak. They had 2 children. They moved to a comfortable house in Niskayuna, New York. He paid his taxes. He committed no other documented crimes. For 29 years, nothing in his external life indicated what he had done. Former FBI profiler Mary Ellen O'Toole, who reviewed the case, noted that a clean record means nothing in isolation. The absence of a rap sheet does not mean that criminal behavior is absent, she said. It means they didn't get arrested for it. O'Toole also challenged the claim that Robin's murder was random. Smirk had brought a weapon. He had a mask. He had gloves. He went on a night the husband was confirmed to be out of the country. This was purposeful, she said. At sentencing, Smirk's own defense attorney, his wife, told the court he had been a troubled young man in 1994 with undiagnosed bipolar II disorder, struggling with alcohol and substance abuse. She said he had spent decades getting sober and building a stable life. She said he confessed because he genuinely felt remorse. His interrogation tape showed no remorse. "I think what you see is 100% what you get from him," Wallace said. Arrogance, entitlement. He wanted to do it, so he did it, and that's it. Robin's family wanted a trial. "We wanted the world to know what he did," Mary said. "We wanted the spectacle of that satisfaction." In October 2024, Smirk accepted a plea deal for first-degree murder. Commonwealth Attorney Steve Descano said the agreement guaranteed accountability while removing the risk that witnesses' memories, now 3 decades old, would become unreliable under cross-examination. On March 7, 2025, the judge sentenced Stefan Smirk to the maximum allowed under the plea, 70 years in prison with the possibility of parole. The judge called Robin's murder among the worst in the history of Fairfax County. Smirk spoke to Robin's family for the first time. "No family should have to wait 30 years for justice for a loved one," he said. "I am extremely sorry for the pain and suffering I have caused." Robert Ward Jr., Robin's brother, addressed the court. "The impact of this crime has been devastating beyond measure. No family should endure such prolonged suffering." Ollie Lawrence gave a statement outside the courthouse. "The War and Lawrence family are grateful that justice has finally been done for the murder of our beloved Robin." Nicole, who had been 2 years old in that house, who had placed tissues on her mother's wounds, who had brought empty baby bottles in the dark, stood beside her cousin Lauren as Lauren spoke to reporters. "As much as it's a sigh of relief," Lauren said, her voice breaking, "we still have to live with this. It just doesn't go away." She looked at Nicole. "She's strong. She stood next to me and she held my hand. Oh my God. If her mom could see us." Robin's niece Lauren, when asked how she wanted people to remember her aunt, said, "Creative, exuberant, very vocal, caring, a beautiful mother." Her art still exists. The medal she sculpted for Rosa Parks still exists. What Stefan Smirk took from this family, from Nicole, from Robert Sr., from Jesse who died not knowing, is the only thing that cannot be recovered. Parabon NanoLabs told investigators the solvability rate on this case was effectively 0. A volunteer named Liz said she would try anyway. She worked 1,500 distant cousins across 3.5 years in her spare time for free. She was ready to give up multiple times. She kept doing one more thing. That is why Robin Lawrence has a name attached to her murder today. Before you leave, Liz's genealogy work alone could not have confirmed the match. The washcloth that a detective almost walked past in 1994 was the piece that made the DNA confirmation possible. If Garmin had not photographed that small brownish stain, none of the genealogy work would have mattered. Which detail in this case do you think was the single most important? The washcloth in 1994 or the genealogy work in 2023? Tell us below. Subscribe to Black Docket. We cover the cases where the science does what the investigation could not. New case every week. The next one is already waiting.